So in this series where we are discussing the gold standard of preparation PYQs, I am going to take you through CAT 2024 slot 2. I'm calling it part 1 because we'll just break it down into 2 parts so that they become manageable. Then you can focus on this one particular session, go through all the questions there, and if you want to continue, you'll of course find more paths and some more PYQs that you can head over to and check those. So let's get started with this passage first up. So we'll read it together and we'll discuss these questions. There is something very special about this particular passage. A particular question, we'll go ahead and highlight that part and discuss it a little more there. So let's go. There are 3 other common drivers for carnivore-human attacks, some of which are more preventable than others. So you notice right off the bat, we know that we have not been given an article from the beginning. We have been given a passage that has been created by picking up something from the middle of some article, some book, because the moment you say other, you know that there were some more. So there are 3 other common drivers for carnivore-human attacks, some of which are more preventable than others. So carnivores, those who eat meat, generally animals, carnivorous animals, if you remember them from your school days. So there are times when carnivores attack humans. There are 3 other common causes behind it, some of which are more preventable than others. So some of these causes can be prevented, or at least they are under our control and there is a greater probability of our preventing those. So what are those? Natural aggression based conflicts, such as those involving females protecting their young or animals protecting a food source, can often be avoided as long as people stay away from those animals and their food. So here is one cause: natural aggression based conflicts. Carnivores that recognize humans as a means to get food are a different story. As they become more reliant on human food, they might find at campsites or in rubbish bins, they become less avoidant of humans. Losing that instinctive fear response puts them into more situations where they could get into an altercation with a human. Altercation here will be a conflict. Normally when we use altercation for human beings, we're just talking about a heated exchange. But here, a conflict, which often results in that bear being put down by humans. So it's just one instance. So maybe there is a bear that becomes accustomed to food available around campsites, and then he loses that fear of human beings. They come in contact, and then of course these conflicts, these attacks can happen, and in such situations that animal is killed by people. A fed bear is a dead bear, says Savine, referring to a common saying among biologists and conservationists. Predatory or predation related attacks are quite rare. So you notice, so this is reason number 2. And here's the third one. Predatory or predation related attacks are quite rare, only accounting for 17% of attacks in North America since 1955. They occur when a carnivore views a human as prey and hunts it like it would any other animal it uses for food. So natural aggression based conflicts, becoming habituated to people around, and thinking of people as a prey. Then there are animal attacks provoked by people taking pictures with them or feeding them in natural settings, such as national parks, which often end with animal being euthanized out of precaution. Euthanized is basically at the end. Euthanasia is mercy killing. So euthanize is another term for we have to put that animal down, we have to kill that animal out of precaution. Why? Because eventually that animal becomes habituated to people and then bad things happen to the animal. So one reason for the habituation was food. Here is another reason for habituation. And the folks who initially wanted to make that connection do not necessarily realize that connection. There are people out in the nature, they see an animal and they're like, oh, we are part of the same nature. I am a life form. That's a life form, let's connect. But they forget the reality that this can eventually lead to the animals attacking humans, and therefore that animal will have to be eventually killed. Says Kristen Wilkinson, a postdoctoral researcher at UC Berkeley, California, who's been studying coyote-human conflicts. Coyotes are wolf-like creatures. After conducting countless postmortems on all types of carnivore-human attacks spanning 75 years, Panteriani's team believes 50% could have been avoided if humans reacted differently. A 2017 study co-authored by Panteriani found that engaging in risky behavior around large carnivores increases the likelihood of an attack. So, if humans could only act more sensibly, these things could have been managed better. Two of the most common risky behaviors are parents leaving their children to play outside unattended and walking an unleashed dog. So humans engage in risky behaviors. Here are two of those risky behaviors given. So according to the study, Wilkinson says 66% of coyote attacks involve a dog. People end up in a situation where their dog is being chased, or their dog chases a coyote, or maybe they are walking their dog near a den that is marked and the coyote wants to escort them away, says Wilkinson. Experts believe climate change also plays a part in the escalation of human carnivore conflict. So here is one more factor, climate change. But the correlation still needs to be ironed out. What it means is that experts believe that climate change plays a part, but they don't have a conclusive evidence for it yet. So when you say correlation needs to be ironed out, experts have observed that because of climate change, there is climate change and there are increased human-animal conflicts. But is there a causal relationship between the two? Is it actually the climate change which has caused that? Is something that we have not been able to verify yet. It could be because of some other reason too. As finite resources become scarcer, carnivores and people are coming into more frequent contact. Limited resources are even less available, maybe because of climate change. So increased contact, which means that more conflict could occur, says Jen Miller, International Program Specialist for the US Fish and Wildlife Service. For example, she says there was an uptick in lion attacks in Western India during a drought where lions and people were relying on the same water sources. The likelihood of human carnivore conflicts appears to be higher in areas of low-income countries dominated by vast rural landscapes and farmland. According to Panteriani's research, there are a lot of working landscapes in the global south that are really heterogeneous, that are interspersed with carnivore habitats, forests and savannas. Savannas are grasslands that normally wild animals would use to feed themselves on, to graze on, which creates a lot more opportunity for these encounters just statistically, says Wilkinson. So that's a passage. Let's dive into the questions. According to the passage, which of the following scenarios would most likely exacerbate the frequency of carnivore-human conflict? To exacerbate is to make something worse. So we basically in this context saying what can increase the frequency of these conflicts on the basis of the passage. A. Addressing the impact of climate change on the availability of resources for wildlife. This is likely to reduce the frequency. Therefore, this can't be the answer. Remember, although the correlation is not ironed out, it appears that finite resources that are scarce, getting scarcer, and human and wildlife needs, both of them need to access it, increases the probability of their coming in contact with each other. So this will reduce it. Unleashing dogs by pet owners in areas with known high concentrations of large carnivores. 60% of human risky behavior, leaving children unattended, plus unleashed dogs. 60% of those attacks were caused by dogs. So if you're carrying unleashed dogs, will it increase the probability? Yes, it will. So this can be our answer. Implementing food waste management strategies to prevent wild animals being attracted to human food sources. This will reduce the probability of animals becoming habituated to humans because they are getting food from them. So you can rule it out. We want to increase the frequency of attacks. This will reduce it. D. Attempting to photograph wild animals from within secured viewing areas in national parks and protected zones. So if you are in an unsecured area, that can cause a problem. If you're in a secured area, you can't be attacked. So it will reduce the frequency. Even this can be ruled out. So B is going to be our answer. A fairly easy question, I would say, don't you think? Let's check the next one. Given the insights provided by Penteriani's research and Wilkinson's statement, which of the following conclusions can be drawn about the relationship between landscape heterogeneity and human carnivore conflicts? This is something which is mentioned in the last paragraph, and the last paragraph says that when there is heterogeneity, the potential for carnivore human conflict increases. So let us see which one of these is consistent with that. So landscape heterogeneity, characterized by a mix of farmland and natural habitats, inherently reduces the chances of human carnivore conflict by providing more refuge for wildlife away from human activity. Now this goes on to state the exact opposite of what is given in the last paragraph. So this is false. So we can rule it out. Low income countries with vast contiguous wilderness areas, contiguous is where their boundaries are shared, are less prone to human carnivore conflicts. This is again false as per the last paragraph. Such areas are more prone, so you can rule it out. C, the diversity and interspersion of working landscapes with carnivore habitats in rural areas increases the statistical probability of encounters. Yes, that's consistent with the last para. Homogeneous landscapes with uniform agriculture practices are more likely to experience high rates of human carnivore conflicts due to the predictability of resources. No, we know that in heterogeneous situations it is higher, so in homogeneous ideally it should be lower, so even this can be ruled out. So C is going to be your best answer. And here comes the special question. Let's read this once. What answer would you like to mark? In fact, if you have been working with me so far, I would want you to pause the video here, answer the question, and then you and I can discuss. Okay, so go ahead, pause, answer it. If you need to refer to the passage, and then we will talk. So I hope you have exerted yourself. You paused, you did as I asked you to, you solved it as I asked you to. Let's go. Which of the following statements, if false, would be inconsistent? Now see, look at what I do. I don't like false in my questions. So false basically means not true. And inconsistent basically means not consistent. So I can cancel these two nots. So which of the following statements, if true, would be consistent with the concerns raised in the passage regarding the drivers of carnivore human conflict? So which of the following is true as per the passage? So let's start. Carnivores lose their instinctive fear of humans when consistently exposed to human food sources. It is definitely consistent with the passage. B, predatory attacks by carnivores are a common occurrence and steadily increased. No, it is a very rare occurrence. So this is not consistent with the passage. C, human efforts to avoid risky behaviors around large carnivores have proven effective in reducing conflict incidents. We don't know. The passage says that humans engage in risky behavior. It says that we should not. It does not talk about that humans are putting in efforts to avoid it and that they've also proven effective. So this will take us beyond the scope of the passage. We cannot call it consistent. D, climate change has had negligible effects on the frequency of carnivore-human interactions in affected regions. Now, the passage says that climate change is one of the reasons, although we do not know the causal effects yet. It still needs to be ironed out. So it suggests that it may have had an effect, although more studies, more research is required. Does the passage say that it has negligible effects? We don't know. It may have negligible effects, it may not have negligible effects. So it's something that we cannot determine on the basis of the passage. So can I say that this is consistent with the passage? I can't. So which answer should we mark? A, but here is the catch. When the official answer key came out, the official answer was D. So what do? I am give you an opportunity to raise objections when the response sheet comes out. So this was one of those questions for which I requested my students to go ahead and raise an objection. That was their official answer. And after that, what they do, what they don't do is something that we are not very sure of. I mean, you need to file an RTI, get into a lot of other things, takes time. We will, in due course of time, I'm thinking of doing that more regularly. But in this particular case, I'm very sure that although you can say, okay, D is negligible effect because it is not determined, but something that is not determined, how would you call it negligible? So I don't agree with D. On the other hand, A is very clearly, very unambiguously consistent. So I would go with A. So when you come across this and you compare it with the official answer key, you may look at this and you're like, yeah, Vikrant said A, but the official answer key says D, and that's because I don't agree with it. I am very sure that D is the wrong answer and A is the right one. And I hope you also agree with my reasoning, my rationale for this particular question here. Chaliye, let's go ahead and look at the next one now. So question number 4. According to the passage, what is a significant factor that contributes to the habituation of carnivores to human presence? Let's see. Predatory perception is rare, so you cannot call it a significant factor. The reduction in carnivores' instinctive fear response resulting from their reliance upon human provided food, yes. So basically, our clicking the photos in a natural setting plus this, these are the two reasons mentioned for their habituation to humans. So this is one of those natural aggression exacerbated by human interference, but then this is not linked to habituation. And then D, increased scarcity of resources due to climate change. Once again, it is not linked with habituation. Habituation was all about their becoming accustomed to being fed by humans or clicking images by humans. So coming in contact with humans, these are not cited as reasons for habituation. B is, and that is why our answer for question number 4 must be option B. Okay, so with that, let's move over to our next passage. Spices were a global commodity centuries before European voyagers. So we've all heard of those intrepid, brave European voyagers like Columbus, who went out and explored the unexplored, right? But then the passage says that spices were a global commodity centuries before those guys came into scene. There was a complex chain of relations, yet consumers had little knowledge of producers and vice versa. So the consumers of spices did not know the producers did not know the consumers. Desire for spices helped fuel European colonial empires to create political, military and commercial networks under a single power. Right? So come to think of it, spices, the desire for them was so strong that it fueled European colonial empires to create political, military and commercial networks under a single power. Historians know a fair amount about the supply of spices in Europe during the medieval period, the origins, method of transportation, the prices, but less about demand. So they knew where it is coming from and how. What they did not know was why are they coming in? Why are people using these spices? Why go to such extraordinary efforts to procure expensive products from exotic lands? Why do that at all? Why take this risk of getting something from really far off places and God knows for what all reasons? And that too, we are talking about exotic places. Things which are exotic are unusual and exciting primarily because they are coming from far off, usually from the Asian regions, usually especially from a tropical country, as we put it. So why did they do that? Still, demand was great enough to inspire the voyages of Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama, launching the first fateful wave of European colonialism. Third paragraph, so why were spices so highly prized in Europe in the centuries from about 1000 to 1500? Why? What was the reason for the demand? One widely disseminated explanation. Disseminated is distributed, well spread. So one explanation that is shared with everyone else is for that medieval demand for spices was that they covered the taste of spoiled meat. Medieval purchasers consumed meat much fresher than what the average city dweller in the developed world of today has at hand. However, refrigeration was not available, and some hot spices have been shown to serve as an antibacterial agent. So number one, they prevent the spoilage. Number two, even when the meat became spoiled, they covered that taste. Most spices used in cooking began as medical ingredients, and throughout the Middle Ages, spices were used as both medicines and condiments. Above all, medieval recipes involve the combination of medical and culinary lore. Lore is any traditional knowledge or stories. Culinary is related to cooking or kitchens. So culinary lore is stories related to, or traditional stories related to cooking. So medieval recipes involve the combination of medical and culinary knowledge. So stories talked about condiments, spices being medically valuable. And of course, they somehow helped you in cooking as well in order to balance food's humoral properties and prevent disease. I think the author misspelled the word, but according to a really old theory, human beings have human beings have 4 different types of fluid in the body, and an imbalance in those types of fluid was the cause of all those illnesses. And those 4 fluids were called humors, and thus the theory was called the 4 humor theory. So you had black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm, cough. So somehow they balanced those 4 humors. Most spices were hot and dry, and so appropriate in sauces to counteract the moist and wet properties supposedly possessed by most meat and fish. So they balanced those humors in your body. Then 4th paragraph, where spices come from was known in a vague sense centuries before the voyages of Columbus. Just how vague may be judged by looking at medieval world maps. To the medieval European imagination, the East was exotic and alluring. Alluring is something which is attractive and exciting. We already talked about exotic a little while ago. Medieval maps often placed India close to the so-called earthly paradise, the Garden of Eden described in the Bible. So India was right next to the heavens. Geographical knowledge has a lot to do with the perception of spices' relative scarcity and the reasons for their high prices. So people thought that they are coming from far off, and that gave them a perception of scarcity, and as a result high prices. An example of the varying notion of scarcities is the conflicting information about how pepper is harvested. You know, pepper, or humble khali mirch, as we call it in Hindi, as far back as the 7th century, Europeans thought that pepper in India grew on trees guarded by serpents that would bite and poison anyone who attempted to gather the fruit. The only way to harvest pepper was to burn the trees, which would drive the snakes underground. Of course, this bit of lore story would explain the shriveled black peppercorns, but not white, pink, or other colors. Something that is shriveled is wrinkled, withered, and dried. So you've seen black peppercorn. So it explains why it is black, why it is withered and dried. However, it will fail to explain the existence of white, pink, or other colors of peppercorns. Spices never had the enduring allure or power of gold and silver. So they were attractive, but their attraction did not last long. Not as long as the attraction for gold and silver has lasted, or for that matter, commercial potential of new products such as tobacco, indigo, or sugar. But the taste for spices did continue for a while beyond the Middle Ages. As late as the 17th century, the English and the Dutch were struggling for control of the Spice Islands. Dutch New Amsterdam, or New York, was exchanged by the British for one of the Moluccan Islands where nutmeg was grown. Nutmeg is one of those spices. Okay, so that's where the passage ends. Let's get into the questions. In the context of the passage, the people who heard the story of pepper trees being guarded by snakes would be least likely to arrive at the conclusion that. So, going by this story, if this story is true, which of the following is not true, if I were to simplify it? So, somebody who believes it is no surprise that the pepper supply is so limited. If this story is true, then this is also true. They are guarded by snakes and you need to light a fire. So we are looking for something which is not true. So that can be ruled out. Pepper is costly for a good reason. True. It is not advisable to go to India to harvest the pepper themselves. True. I mean, you'd have to face a tree which is guarded by snakes and they can bite you, and then you have to light fire. This is why pepper is so hot. Hot here is referring to the taste. Fire is not connected to the taste. So this is not connected to the story. This is not true on the basis of the story. And that is why this should be our answer to the question. Let's look at the next one. If a trader brought white peppercorns from India to medieval Europe, all of the following are unlikely to happen except. So we're basically saying one of the following is likely to happen. So one of the following is likely to be true if people saw white peppercorns from India in medieval Europe. Pepper would no longer be considered exotic? No. Black peppercorn was considered exotic because it came from a far off land. If white peppercorn comes in, it will still remain exotic. Europeans would doubt the story of pepper harvesting. Oh yes, why is black peppercorn shriveled and black? Because of fire. So if there is fire in their harvesting, how are these peppercorns white? That makes you doubt the story of harvesting. So this is something that is likely to happen if you see a white peppercorn. The price of spices would decrease. No, price is determined by demand and supply. So you have a little bit of black peppercorn. Now you also have a little bit of white peppercorn. That is unlikely to affect the demand supply dynamic much. So won't change it. Medieval maps would be used as navigational aids. What has that got to do with white peppercorns? No connection. So you can rule it out. So the only thing which is true is B. The only thing which is likely is B, and therefore that is going to be our answer. Here is the next question. In the context of the passage, which one of the following conclusions cannot be reached? So once again, 3 of these are true, 1 is not true, and that's going to be our answer. Colonialism was motivated by the demand for spices. True. You can find this in the first and the second paragraph. Tobacco was more marketable than spices. True. Look at the last paragraph. Spices did not have the enduring allure of gold and silver or the new commercial. In fact, let me take you to the last paragraph and I can highlight the line. Here it is. Commercial potential of new products such as tobacco. So tobacco had a greater potential than spices, which means that they were more marketable than spices. The spice trade was a driver of colonial expansion. True. India was colonized for its spices and gold. Can't say. Why can't say? Spices could have been a reason, but gold has not been cited as a reason for colonization anywhere in the passage. So this part is definitely can't say, and therefore the final label will also be can't say. So A, B and C are true, D is can't say. So which one of these cannot be inferred, cannot be concluded? D, and that's why D is going to be our answer. Next, it can be inferred that all of the following contributed to a decline in the allure of spices except. So one of the following contributed to, in fact, let's just keep it as it is and let's just treat it as an odd one out, okay? All of the following contributed to a decline in the allure of spices except. So 3 of these are the reasons behind decline in the use of spices. One is not. So now this is a question that is not directly mentioned in the passage, but we have to infer it. So remember the third paragraph that talked about the demand of spices. Why were people using spices? Because it allowed them to cover the taste of the spoiled meat. There was no refrigeration, so there was this antibacterial property that they used. Then they were also used as medicines. So those were the reasons behind using spices. What if those reasons no longer exist? Then there'll be a decline in the use of spices. So development of refrigeration will lead to a decline. Changes in European cuisine, increase in the availability, changes in the European cuisine. So it was part of the cuisine, right? You were cooking in a certain manner and therefore you were using spices. If you start cooking in a different way, it can lead to a decrease. Mind you, it was part of the culinary lore as well. Increase in the availability of spices. So if the spice availability increases, it would simply mean that the prices will decline. Why would the demand go down? This does not explain the demand. D, changes in the system of medical treatment. Spices were also used as medicines. So if you no longer use them as medicines, their demand will decline. So C is the only one that is not directly connected to a fall in demand, and therefore that is the one that we need to use as our answers, and thus C is what we'll mark. So here we had to do some indirect bit of juggling and figure out the relevant bits in order to arrive at the answer. A and D, I'd say, are relatively easy to eliminate. B and C, particularly B, would have required a closer reading of the passage, which if you do, you would have arrived at the right answer fast. So that's about passage 2. So with that, let's dive into our next question. So this is the best summary question. Let's read it and then we'll start eliminating. John Cleese told Fox News Digital that comedians do not have the freedom to be funny in 22. Why? There's always been limitations on what they're allowed to say. I think it's particularly worrying at the moment because you can only create in an atmosphere of freedom where you are not checking everything you say critically before you move on. What you have to be able to do is to build without knowing where you are going because you've never been there before. That's what creativity is. After all, see, creativity is coming up with something new. So if you continue to think and think and think and build upon that, then you reach a place which is new. That's how you are creative. So that's what creativity is. You have to be allowed to build. And a lot of comedians now are sitting there, and when they think of something, they say something like, can I get away with it? I don't think so. So and so got into trouble and he said that or she said that. You see what I mean? And that is the death of creativity. So it's basically saying that the current climate is somehow threatening, or the comedians find it threatening enough to self-censor, which is leading to a loss of creativity. Let's see what captures it. Creativity and critical thinking cannot work together. Comedians must first be creative and later be critical. Are we talking about the sequence at all? No, this is an addition. Freedom and creativity are essential for comedy. Yes. Fear about offending people hinders originality. The fear is bigger than offending people. There is an actual threat because when you say, okay, but then it says got into trouble. It can be with people. I'm probably thinking more of an Indian context where I started thinking of jail, etc. But got into trouble could also mean a public backlash. So yeah, we can check this. Comedians must not check what they think and say. They must go where no one has gone before. This is only partly true. It misses out on the fact that the current climate is not allowing them to do so freely. Comedians are being prevented from saying what they want, and that is the death of this art form. Are they being prevented? No. Nobody is preventing them, but there is an atmosphere which leads to self-censoring. Plus, it also misses out on the fact that you need to have freedom for creativity. B is better on that count as well. So the best answer will be option B. Let's dive into our next question now. So it says, no known researcher. Okay, so this is an odd one out where we have been given 5 sentences. 4 of them belong to the same theme. One stands out and we need to figure that out. So let's read them first. No known real researcher of human behavior would say that gender is all nature or all nurture. So he's saying if you talk to a researcher of human behavior, he will tell you that gender is a combination of nature and nurture. It's a combination of your genes and your upbringing. Nobody would say that it is just the genes, just biology, or just the upbringing. Okay, second, the evidence for a biological basis for gender certainly does not mean we should be complacent in the face of sexism. Okay, it says that because we have an evidence that gender is biological, it does not mean that we allow people to be sexist, or in other words, we allow people to treat women as inferior life forms. Many people are uncomfortable with the idea that gender is not purely a social construct. Okay, despite this empirical truth, researchers who study the biological basis of gender often face political pushback. There is a political preference for gender to be only a reflection of social factors and so entirely malleable. So you notice, researchers believe it's a combination of the two, yet whenever a researcher studies the biological basis, there is a political pushback, and 3 and 5 are talking about that pushback. So if I look at 1, 3, 4, 5, they lead to a theme which says that, hey, researchers do not really believe that gender is just biology or just social. But whenever a researcher looks at the biological aspects, there is a pushback, and the reason for pushback is in 3 and 5. Second leads to a different thing altogether. There is nothing else here that talks about finding an evidence for a biological basis, but we do have enough that says that people or society in general does not believe in biological basis of gender, and that is why 2 will not belong to this theme and will thus be left out. So that's going to be our answer here. So chaliye, let's go over to the next question, which now I'm skipping the directions. I'm just writing the type here. So best summary question, where you're given a paragraph, 4 alternate summaries, you need to choose the best summary. So let's go ahead and work on this. Recent important scientific findings have emerged from crossing the boundaries of scientific fields. So this sentence tells us that we are getting some new findings in the world of science, and the cause behind those new findings is what? Crossing the boundaries of scientific fields. So we have these silos, right? So we have all these different categories. To look at it broadly, you have physics, you have chemistry, you have biology. Then within physics, you can have a lot of different branches. Within chemistry, you have a lot of different branches. And normally a specialist keeps himself to just his area. But what the first sentence says is that when they cross those boundaries, when they leave their own area and venture into another, it is then that some findings have emerged. So and then there is this elaboration, okay? They stem from physicists collaborating with biologists, sociologists, and others to answer questions about our world. So physicists are collaborating with people from a lot of different areas. But, and wherever there is a but, you know that there is going to be some sort of constraint. So, but physicists and their potential collaborators often find their cultures out of sync. So they are able to produce findings, but their culture is basically frequently repeated actions and the way of looking at things, they are not exactly similar. For one, physicists often discard a lot of information while extracting broad patterns. For other scientists, information is not readily disposed. Now the grammarian in me keeps in coming. So actually it should have been disposed of. We needed to have an off here to make it grammatically correct. So physicists are comfortable in discarding a lot of information in order to get a broad pattern, whereas the other scientists do not find it that easy to discard information. Further, many non-physicists are uncomfortable with mathematical models. Still, the desire to work on something new and different is real, and there are clear benefits from the collision of views. So there are differences, and even those differences are leading to clear-cut benefits, and they want to collaborate. So let's go ahead and start. A, large data sets and mathematical models in physics research combined with the research methods of non-physicist collaborators have yielded important scientific findings. This entire part is an addition. This is not even given in the paragraph, and therefore we can safely eliminate option A. Let's dive into B. The desire to diversify their research and answer important questions has led to several collaborations between physicists and other social scientists. This is correct, but it does leave two parts out. The two parts are, number one, there are challenges in collaboration, and number two, we are not talking about just the social scientists. I mean, you also have people like biologists who are not exactly social scientists. So if I look at B, I'll say that B suffers from deletion of one major point and a minor thing. C, despite differences in their research styles, physicists' research collaborations with scholars from other disciplines have yielded important research findings. Now, if I compare B and C, you notice it is giving us that other key idea of differences, right? And that makes C better than B. Moreover, in B, we were stating just the social scientists. Here we are talking about scholars from other disciplines. So we are not excluding biologists and others from the option. So in comparison, C is better. So let's eliminate B and dive into D. Physicists have successfully buried their differences on research methods applied in other fields in their desire to find answers to baffling scientific questions. Where does the paragraph say that they have successfully buried their differences on research methodologies? In fact, the paragraph says that this collision does lead to something positive. So have they buried their differences, or are they able to produce the results because of their differences? So this is an addition, and therefore D can also be ruled out. So the best answer for us here is going to be option C. With that, let's go ahead and have a look at our next question. This is a paragraph completion question of a specific format that we call sentence placement. Here, the examiner gives us a sentence followed by a paragraph with 4 blanks, and our job is to figure out the most suitable blank for placing this sentence. So you can pause and solve it if you haven't. Let me give you a few seconds. Let's go ahead and now discuss it. So the Europeans did not invent globalization. Okay, let's look at the paragraph now. The first phase of globalization occurred long before the introduction of either steam or electric power. Chinese consumers at all social levels consumed vast quantities of spices, fragrant woods, and unusual plants. The peoples of Southeast Asia, look at peoples. When you write peoples in this context, you're talking about citizens of different countries. So Southeast Asia had a lot of countries, and we are talking about citizens of all those countries who lived in forests, gave up their traditional livelihoods, and completely reoriented their economies to supply Chinese consumers. Interesting. Then there is a blank. These exchanges of the year 1000 opened some of the routes through which goods and peoples continued to travel after Columbus traversed the mid-Atlantic. So we already have exchanges here between peoples of Southeast Asia and Chinese consumers. So these exchanges can refer to these. So there is no need for a sentence here per se. Yet the world of 1000 differed from that of 1492 in important ways. So you notice this happened first. Columbus came in later, which was part of European globalization. And this sentence once again talks about the world of year 1000. So if you put it in here, we will essentially destroy the coherence of these two pointers. So you can rule this out for sure. Yet the world of 1000 differed from that of 1492 in important ways. The travelers who encountered one another in the year 1000 were much closer technologically. They changed and augmented what was already there since 1000. So if there are these travelers who are similar technologically, how will they change and augment? If you want to augment something, strengthen something, you need to learn from others. And if there is not much to learn, how would you really augment? So that is where we perhaps need to bring in people who are technologically superior. So the Europeans did not invent globalization. Globalization was already in place. They can then refer to Europeans, and we can say that the Europeans changed and augmented what was already there since 1000. So they added on to it. So if globalization hadn't yet begun, Europeans would not have been able to penetrate the markets in so many places as quickly as they did after 1492. So even this would work. So this in a way tells us that this was a start of the European globalization. So one can also then be very safely ruled out. So because going from the sentence before blank 3 and after blank 3 is leading to a gap in the idea, it is best placed here. 4 can then go ahead. Fourth blank, even if we don't put anything here, can continue the theme that is being talked about. So our answer should be blank 3. That corresponds to option C, and that's the one that should be our answer as a result here. So that's the part 1 of our CAT 24 slot 2 paper. In the next part, I'll take you through the remaining 12 questions. Stay tuned for that, and I hope you learn a lot from it. In case you need to know anything else, make sure that you drop the comment down below, and I'd love to help you in your journey. Take care and have a nice day.